Detroit-Wayne County International Airport. We are in the Evans Terminal, also known as the North Terminal. I would have had about 2 minutes to run and find the bus stop to catch the bus that would take me to downtown, the fast bus, not the Detroit Airport Express, the DAX bus. Those are the two kinds. So I'm gonna charge my phone for an hour here until the next hour's bus comes, which will probably be a good outcome because my bus pass for DART, Detroit's city bus system, is on my phone, and I will need my phone in order to get around. So we'll just hang out here and see what we see. They call it the Motor City in the sense that it's the corporate origin of the modern personal vehicle. Tying that image to Detroit for a century tied the prosperity of the city too closely to one industry, such that the decline and sale of the major American automakers became the wave that all in the city rode into this new century. Detroit commuters have bus choices around their city, more selectively so their metro, and a handful of intercity routes do exist throughout the region. From the airport, there's the fast Michigan limited stop bus, not exactly a BRT line, but promoted as an upgrade to 3 suburban corridors. It's separate from DDOT, or DART, I can't tell which they usually go by, the buses that traverse the city proper. Mostly, as it is in the Twin Cities where I'm out of, FAST seems to be structured with the intent to appeal to drivers avoiding parking costs or traffic to and from downtown foremost, and to provide minimal usefulness to citizens living without a personal vehicle on the corridor. So it wasn't technically filthy, it actually smelled really clean when it started, but everybody vapes on it. And even the driver was smoking a cigar on his break. So, yep, that's what we got. But it was fast. The lack of frequency service across non-peak or overnight hours, as well as crosstown corridors, makes Detroit well in line with so many middle American cities, where it's considered an oddity to live without a vehicle. The lack of service is justified due to low ridership because of the inconvenient frequencies and spoken hub patterns of downtown linked commutes. Conversion of longer routes to minimally more convenient running patterns has a basic appeal that reeks of a dead-end plan at first. But I've got to admit, the connections in Dearborn with the Amtrak station on my bus made it seem more useful as a way to fly into Detroit and then get into Amtrak's system elsewhere. Which would be true if Amtrak didn't presently have such limited service frequencies in Michigan around Detroit. If state plans to increase rail lines in the state are realized, more routes like these are staged to be serviceable connections that make travel to these cities more appealing from a transit tourist standpoint like myself. But weirdos like me aren't the main concern for public transit systems, right? Detroit's bus system with its system of transfer points, most of which are conveniently accessed in downtown settings, make for a good way to fill anyone's day with a commute around the city. But if I were a local taxpayer with a job to get to, these schedule patterns and protracted commute times wouldn't be my first choice. The overall system doesn't have enough coverage over parts of the day to be a viable option for running errands across town, especially if you live in the suburbs. Well, that's what it's come to because the sandwich place is closed today and tomorrow, conveniently, of all the days of summer, so, Labor Day. See, what's a vacation without your main reason for going to lunch falling completely off the map because they're closed, and then you have to go to a grocery store and just eat whatever's there. And I will say that was one of those urban Krogers that has a layout that doesn't make sense in any way. When I came in there was a line probably 20 people deep for the self-checkout, and my instinct was just to turn around, but I remembered you're not part of that mob. You will be able to walk around, and then by the time I got to the front, there was no line. So yeah, it worked out in Grosse Pointe Village. But the bones are there for something greater. FAST sort of proves this to anyone who might have already been riding the bus for their specific reason. And we have just stepped over the line into Detroit, And it really is just like that. This, at one point you're in this really gentrified part, and then you're in Detroit. It's as simple as that.
A good bus system to me is a civil place to be moving about the city, not without character, but respectful. Coming from the Twin Cities, I don't really experience this kind of civility enough on the bus, and certainly on rails. The people riding and operating the buses I rode over a day on the Michigan and Mac corridors were totally decent to each other. There was some vaping aboard, yeah, but the one guy who needed to talk aloud to anyone who would hear him on the bus got politely coaxed off within a few stops by the driver after getting atop his soapbox. I didn't even have a full 24 hours in Detroit, and it was the holiday weekend on Labor Day, yeah. Hardly a great cross-section of Detroit's landscape of personalities, but I feel like, based on my experience in transit systems that get mediocre levels of civility, that such here in Detroit was the expectation and not the exception to the norm. I'm sure someone could comment I didn't go to 8 Mile, and I didn't try to go across the border to Windsor, yeah. It was a short, cheap trip, but the buses alone were great ways to get across town without the trips being anything to not look forward to.
Hey, let's ride this thing. Come with me, let's ride this thing.
One bit I had looked forward to was experiencing Detroit's QLine streetcar. This weird line is named from its initial corporate-sponsored brand via Quicken Loans, now Rocket Mortgage. Since 2017, this has been the link between downtown and New Center neighborhoods, marketed for serving as a daytime bridge for those with business along primarily Woodward Avenue. It's the end result of decades spent trying to develop some kind of rail-based transit to serve that sweet, sweet streetcar cash that was prevalent around the first part of the century.
Broad Street, brought to you by Village Companies.
Today, these Pennsylvania-built Brookville Liberty electric streetcars run on overhead lines as well as onboard battery power. It's now directly operated by Detroit's RTA rather than Transdev, as it had been when it opened. They also don't charge a fare to ride it, so it's reliant on public dollars and corporate sponsorship to remain operational. There are plenty of bus connections to DDOT that can be made using the line, as well as SMART, provided Woodward within a handful of miles from downtown is in your path. And ideally, as with the buses themselves, it's advantageous to be needing to go downtown to use QLine. It does run a different route than buses once in the city center, which you can see was bustling on the Sunday I visited due to the annual jazz festival taking place. This also shut down the line past Campus Martius Station. This was a surprisingly nice streetcar to ride. The seats were a cushy change from the DDOT buses. It didn't take me far, but it dropped me right into downtown with easy access to what would be the most strange part of my day riding Detroit's transit.
You want to come ride this other thing? Come on, let's ride this other thing.
The people mover is quite the notion. There, I said it. It doesn't belong in our present dimension. It's a relic of a time when there was a lot more business taking place in downtown Detroit. The infrastructure was luckily built within enough marginal private property, much in the same fashion as the skyway systems of other Midwestern cities I've been to, so as to be able to exist as a fringe transit choice over, I guess in this case, walking? Though you'd still have to walk quite a bit once you get off the train.
This is the Renaissance Center station.
This ride is completely fare-free too, like the QLine, but they have stations that are monitored by police for riders' security, so it's livable if a loop around downtown is the path you end up living on any given day. This system seems too catered to me, a visitor, such that they overdid its usefulness via the propriety of its third rail-powered infrastructure rolling anywhere other than stranded around the second stories of all the questionably important, by modern standards, downtown stations. I mean, yeah, people still do stay around here and go to events around here, but other than that, it's locked into this area. As I've titled this series, Detroit is a city in transit, on the move toward somewhere. Their people mover, the QLine, the basic yet upgradable bus network all speak to this.
There's an announcement being made in repetition, and I can't piece together 2 words in it. But it keeps going on and on as I await this bus.
Your tourism capabilities on these lines are as limited as citizens' capability to effectively utilize it in their daily plans, rather than using a personal vehicle. That being said, they do all have the serviceable capability to do more in the future. Such is no better exemplified in the transit infrastructure of Detroit than Michigan Central Station, which was conveniently near the hostel I was staying at.
This is an old train station that is now owned by the Ford Motor Company. And I think there might be trains to it again someday. Maybe.
Just west of downtown, the Ford Motor Company bought this old train station and elegantly structured office building for little understood reasons. This begged the question among rail fans as to whether the site was being developed for intercity rail. Eventually, it became known around early 2025 that a planned passenger train from Chicago to Toronto had been prioritized in planning, and this new train would conceptually serve Michigan Central Station. There would need to be new platforms and passenger amenities developed to serve travelers if this plan goes forward. The route to Windsor would also need the extension of a small rail Y to serve Via Rail's line and station then. Of course, every other thing would also need to align across a handful of governments spanning 2 countries. But after those simple steps, people could catch trains out of this fine-looking station building once again. I had a good day in Detroit. I didn't go out for much more than a glimpse of how people get around on the last Sunday of summer. But what I saw was more promising than I had expected to see based on those living outside of Detroit telling me what to expect. I'd come back here, ideally with plans to head on to Toronto by train. As I have an enhanced driver's license, I'm both ready for real ID and I'm able to make a land crossing via the tunnel bus from downtown, or by train someday in the future. My time spent getting back to St. Paul the next day went on and was a fun ride on the fresh-looking but uncomfortable venture passenger cars of Amtrak. Something else that made me glad to have had the pleasant moments aboard Detroit by bus, streetcar, and that other thing to distract me on the brief weekend spent wandering. That concludes my look at Detroit. I've got some California sights to show as well as Chicago-bound trains to cover in the months to come. I don't know when I'll be back in Detroit, but I got my bearings about me for that day, and I look forward to showing y'all what happens then. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Next door that's open, Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's going to be